Friday. Got a couple topics for y'all today, very timely topics, although slightly different topics, as we've got, we always have new products and new features and benefits of our products to talk about. So as you can see from the slide here, we're going to be talking about adding storage to existing PV systems, and then we'll be talking about a specific new high capacity battery that we have, that being the 1000 XLC high capacity battery. Like Hannah said, my name is Chris Canfield. I come from, I've been at OutBack for coming up on 3.5 years now. Before that, my name is a little familiar, I guess, maybe to some of you online. I don't see who the attendees are, but 3.5 years here at OutBack. I've worked at Schneider Electric for a total of 4 years, with a stint at Fronius in between. So my whole 10 years in the industry, or almost 10 years in the industry, has been on the inverter manufacturer side, and most of it has been on the storage side. I'm no expert by any means. We have engineers to be experts, thank goodness, because that's where all the tough questions go. But I think I've dummied down this presentation enough for me to be able to sound somewhat intelligent. So let's hope that's the case, and let's get into it. Adding storage to existing PV systems. And here's the agenda for this portion of the presentation. Obviously very timely now with the shutdowns. For those of you that are in California, and even those of you outside of California have heard about the PG&E shutdowns. We've been inundated with calls mostly from distributors, sometimes from installers, sometimes from homeowners saying, you know, I've got PV on my house, why is it not working? So adding storage to an existing system, not just for that reason, but acutely right now for that reason, has become really front of mind for us here. Why add batteries? There are multiple cases. Again, I mentioned shutdowns and what have you, but as far as installers and why installers should, you know, look for this kind of business. Existing customers already understand the benefits of solar. You know, if they already have PV, they get it. You know, you don't have to start from kind of zero with them. You already have a relationship with your past customers. That's obviously a no-brainer. And the existing PV systems or PV owners want backup. If you look at the chart, this is the, you know, customer acquisition cost, and that remains pretty flat no matter what. And going forward is going to remain pretty flat, but when you're talking to an existing customer, that obviously decreases, the percentage here will decrease significantly. Good candidates are system owners. Obviously, if we're talking about battery retrofit, they would technically have to be a system owner, as we'd be talking about adding batteries or retrofitting for batteries. Power outage victims, pretty self-explanatory, and preppers. We all know that preppers are great OutBack customers. They were great Schneider customers. They're great storage customers, is what they are. I think we seem to have a sweet spot with the prepper kind of community, which is nice, having been around for 20 years as OutBack has. Not so good candidates over on the right: lease or PPA customers, renters or landlords, and high maintenance customers. Just something to think about. If you have high maintenance customers and they quote unquote only have a grid tie system, and they're, you know, oh, this module's out again, you know, or this one's producing at 3/4 power or what have you, they may not be the best candidates for storage systems, as you know, batteries do introduce some user involvement, you know, and certainly a lot more things to monitor. So just might want to think twice about an existing high maintenance customer as someone that you want to add batteries to. Business benefits, already touched on this a little bit, but reduced origination costs because you're talking to existing customers. You may be able to get referrals. There are still a lot of installers that don't do batteries, but their customers are going to call them and say, again, why is my power out? I've got, you know, these modules on the house. So you may get a lot of referrals, or you may get referrals from customers who, or installers who don't do batteries, and customer referrals for PV jobs will likely refer you for battery jobs. Pretty self-explanatory. Backup is needed for a complete solution brand of energy services. A lot of customers are looking for that now. I mean, a lot of existing customers had their solar, the grid tie solar, put on years ago, and now, you know, storage is, you know, all the rage, and for good reasons. You know, whether it's time of use, or again, issues with the grid, issues with the utility, that really kind of completes the system. And again, as we all know, storage, residential storage just as a whole has exploded over the last really year and a half. Keeps crews busy. Your existing crews can install batteries too, or they can learn to install batteries. And then underneath there at the bottom, you can see that we have our ESSP program. It's 4 days of hands-on learning, either at our headquarters up in Washington State or in Phoenix, Arizona. We alternate back and forth. It's usually monthly. We do skip the month of December. So I believe early November is the last one for the year, and then we get back into it in January. We have a training facility, and Alpha, our quasi-parent company, used to be our parent company, has facilities there in Phoenix that we're able to use. Just real quick before I get into the retrofit options here, speaking of that, I probably should have spoken about this up front. OutBack had been purchased by the Alpha Group, which is also a Washington-based business group. They do a lot of storage projects, a lot of telecom batteries and storage and what have you. That was about 10 years ago, and real recently, within a year, almost a year from right now, we were acquired by Enersys. Enersys is the battery manufacturer, big global, multi-billion-dollar battery manufacturer, and they bought Alpha. So by buying Alpha, they bought OutBack. So Enersys is our parent company now, has been for the case for about a year. So retrofit option one, just a couple slides on this, is basically swapping the grid-tied system for a DC coupled system. Basically, the way I like to illustrate it is this photo here shows the Skybox. The Skybox is a 5 kW transformerless, takes two 600 volt strings all in one product. So no charge controllers, no communication equipment that are separate from it as you would have with the Radian. So a real specific example would be if you have customers with older systems. And the reason I say older systems is twofold. They're usually smaller systems. Systems have gotten bigger over the years, and also the inverter may be pressing up against the 10-year warranty, the grid tie inverter, that is. I always say like a Fronius IG, because a Fronius IG could be up to 5 kilowatts, and they want to add storage. A simple way to do that would be to swap out that inverter for a Skybox or a Radian system. The Skybox is probably the better option just because it is an all-in-one that can land two 600 volt strings, whereas with the Radian, you need charge controllers. The biggest charge controller we have is a 100 amp 300 volt charge controller, so the strings would probably have to be adjusted, whereas with, again, a Fronius IG, a Sunny Boy 5000, what have you, that's already taking two 600 volt strings, and there's not a lot of work to be done. No work to be done on the roof. It's quite simply plugging the strings into the new inverter. Obviously, there's some work on the backside if it is a Skybox or a Radian, in that you'd add the batteries and there are different settings and what have you, but it keeps you off the roof. It's a pretty simple swap. So that's really like the best case scenario would be swapping out a 5 kW inverter for a Skybox, or swapping out a bigger inverter for a Radian. But again, you have to keep in mind that the FM100 may need and probably would need shorter strings when using it with the Radian. Something else to keep in mind, of course, is also the rapid shutdown requirements still apply. So, string level shutdown is available from OutBack. Module level shutdown is available with either of our OutBack products, the Radian or the Skybox, with Tigo or IMO. And we sell what's called the IMO Fire Raptor. That is, AEE would know this, but that is on our price list. So that could be ordered from AEE through us, because that particular rapid shutdown solution works very well with both of our products. Advantages and disadvantages. Best battery management. If you swap out the inverter, it's more efficient than AC coupling. AC coupling is the next topic that we'll get to, a little more involved. So it's the best battery management. It's the most efficient way to charge, which obviously helps with battery longevity, and you can disable charging from the grid. It's a simple single vendor system, in that, again, you can basically get everything from us, whether it's a Skybox or it's a Radian with charge controllers. Again, string level rapid shutdown. And again, it's the easiest generator integration too, because it's right there. We have generator ports on both the Skybox and the Radian. Disadvantages, I've mentioned this, but the FM100, so this would be if you're using a Radian, because with a Radian, you would need the separate equipment, the charge controllers and the communication equipment. It may require some array configuration. Odds are the strings on an existing grid tie system are 600 volt. If they are going into a string inverter, you would have to reconfigure to, make the strings the correct size, which would not be 600 volt, but rather would be 300 volt strings to go through the FM100. It can be done, but it's, just a little bit of extra work. This is also something to keep in mind. It may trigger additional permitting requirements. Sometimes yes, sometimes not at all. It really depends on the AHJ. AHJ may consider it a new system, and if they come look at it and there was a string inverter, but no optimizers or what have you on the roof, they may then require, that you bring it up to, NEC 2017, and you have to add those. So just something to keep in mind. And some of them might not care, might not say a thing, might just say, okay, great, go for it, swap this out, this inverter out for that, everything else is good because of when it was installed. So you never do know. Make sure to do your homework. You don't want any gotchas at the very end. So now we'll move into AC coupling. AC coupling is a big topic. Like I said, in particular, it's been a big topic recently in the California geography due to utility shutdowns and a lot of homeowners, and I know every installer tells the homeowner, hey, when the power goes out, has been lost. Okay, all right, hopefully you guys can hear me. I got a little bubble that said my audio was lost there for a second. So AC coupling, the starting point for AC coupling is very simple. Here's your grid tied system, grid, the main panel, the grid tie inverter, and the PV, very simple. And as we all know, the grid is needed to make that system run. Again, homeowners sometimes forget that, but I believe everyone on this call realizes that. So AC coupling with active PV and grid. AC coupling is basically, it's not substituting, but rather is adding a storage solution to an existing grid tied solution. That is, in a nutshell, what AC coupling means. The output of the grid tied inverter is connected to the Radian output. You can kind of follow the arrows here in the visual. Protected loads can be served from the Radian, the grid tie inverter, or the grid. All kind of depends on what's working at the particular time, and I've got the examples on the upcoming slides. Batteries charged from the grid tie inverter or the grid, it absolutely can be, and surplus PV can be exported only if the Radian is in the appropriate mode, and we can help you with system design when you get to that point. So this is without active PV. So let's say at night, there is no PV. This would basically be at night. When the grid is connected, but there is no PV, the Radian basically acts as a wire. Everything pretty much just moves through it from the grid. Again, the battery can be charged from the grid if that's allowed, and that's again, those are settings on the Radian. You would want that allowed. I mean, why not? Go ahead and use the grid while you have it, unless you want the PV to charge the batteries during the day, and then of course not as much as going to the main panel. It's really, there are so many different ways to configure the Radian, not just in AC coupling, but we're talking about an AC coupled situation or an AC coupled solution here. There's a lot of different ways to program the Radian. We do have AC coupling firmware that is downloadable onto the Radian, as it is relatively new for us. We AC coupled back in the day. We used some kind of external transfer box, for lack of a better term. This was before my time at OutBack, and it was a piece of junk. Is quite frankly how the engineers have described it to me, and for that reason, for years, we got away from recommending AC coupling because we just didn't have a good solution. I'll explain why the solution is better now. Okay, so here's where the radian, here's one situation where the radian, excuse me, can kick in during a daytime grid outage. So this is why you AC couple, because again, normally with that grid out, you're not getting anything, right? So whether a grid loss with PV would, for example, be, you know, a utility shutdown. That could be a way of doing it, or, you know, a transformer issue somewhere up the line. So with the grid out, the radian basically becomes the grid to the grid tied inverter. The grid tied inverter needs a grid to keep working, and well, lo and behold, the grid's still there. It's the radian in this case. It automatically isolates itself and the grid tie inverter from protected loads, from the grid to prevent backfeed. Absolutely has to be done. The radian would not be approved for AC coupling if that was not something that the radian did. The protected loads, the load panel over here in the lower left, served by the grid tie inverter and or the radian. Now, how is it served by the grid tie inverter? Well, if you're to power loads, you're basically, again, even though the grid is out, the radian is still acting as a wire, but in this case, it's acting as a wire for it's acting as both a wire and the grid for the grid tied inverter. It's acting as a grid in that, okay, the grid tie inverter senses a grid and remains functioning. It's acting as a wire in that the PV being produced is sent to the protected or sent to the load panel, sent to the critical load panel that's set up. The main panel is not served because that's usually served by the grid or the PV inverter, but that's part of what has to be you know, shut off or isolated, if you will. The battery can be charged from the grid tie inverter surplus power, which is nice. So without the grid, you can charge the battery and also power the critical loads. So AC coupled system on a dark and stormy night. So let's say the PV and the grid are out. Basically, it becomes an off-grid system. The radian is, you know, the batteries, the radian, the critical loads panel. That's it. That's the only part of the equation that is on at that point in time. So hopefully the batteries have been charged during the day. That's always the point, of course, so that you have battery power for this particular situation when you have no grid or PV. So this is what makes AC coupling with the radian work now that we did not have in the past. It uses what's called frequency shift. And I'll let you all read the slides. I may touch on a sentence here or there, but basically, again, the old external transfer box didn't do its job very well and would cause the system to shut down because the grid tie inverter would want to continue to work when it shouldn't, when the batteries were full and there was no grid, so there'd be nowhere for the power to go. So that would shut the whole system down eventually. So in short, what frequency shift does is the radian with the firmware on it, which is downloadable and is needed, special firmware required to enable. It's online, so it's pretty easy to download and you know, upload back into the radian. But basically, as the battery gets closer, the batteries get closer and closer to full charge, the radian will, back to the grid tie inverter, will adjust the frequency. As we know, frequency typically is 60 hertz, and if it gets too out of whack, it's going to knock things offline, including the grid tie inverter. Well, in this case, that's what we want, because if there's no grid, if there's nowhere else for the power to go, if the battery is full, in-phase systems or microinverter systems. And one thing I don't know that I have this on any slide, so please make a note of this, and you'd find this online, but please make a note of this. The rule with AC coupling with Radian is that Radian will AC couple with 75% grid tie inverter worth, if you will. That's kind of explained crappy, but what I mean is an 8 kW Radian will couple with a 6 kW or smaller grid tied string inverter or 6 kW or less of an N-phase or a microinverter system. No more than that. That's what it's been tested to do. That's fairly standard, I believe, as far as AC coupling options go. Not that there are a lot of AC coupling options. So I was speaking with a customer actually right before this who has a customer who's bought two 8 kW Radians kits. I'll show you what the kits are, but two AC coupling kits with the 8048s. Customers have in-phase systems. The customers each have 8 or 9, I think one has 8, one has 9 kilowatts worth of in-phase up on the roof. The nice thing about AC coupling with Radian is, okay, you only can AC couple with 6 kW worth of that in-phase that's on the roof, but the remainder, the 2 kW in one case, the 3 kW in another case, still function as a regular grid-tied system when it's not in, when the grid is still there. So you don't lose anything up on the roof. Even though you haven't AC coupled with the entire system, you do not lose the functionality of that unless the grid goes out. Of course, when the grid goes out, then the Radian, as I explained before, is only going to quote unquote work with the 6 kW worth of N-phase that is AC coupled through it. So 75% rule. It's not on a slide. I realize that it should be. Please make note of that.